Hello, everyone. I think we are live. Let me check. I think we are. Am I audible to everyone? I hope this time it works. Yep, I think this time we are audible. Nice. Great. Okay, then let's wait for another 1 minute and then we can get started. I can see people are gathering. We have around 7 people, 8 people right now watching the stream. So let's wait for another minute and then we can get started. Okay, I think we can start. So, welcome everyone to the first meetup, Magento Meetup Nagpur of 2022. Apologies for yesterday's mishap. We were trying something new and had some technical difficulties with the audio. So, thank you so much for joining back with us today. So, let's move on with our presentation. So, if anybody is new to our meetup group, I would really like you to join our meetup. The slide is the old one from yesterday of 29th January. So this is 30th January today. So don't be confused on that. So we have our meetup link in the description of this video. So you can click on it to join the meetup group. We also have a Telegram group, and we post daily contents about Magento, everything new with PHP, e-commerce, and things like that. So if you are interested in that, please do consider joining the Telegram group as well. The link of the Telegram group is also mentioned in the video description. We also have this channel, which is Mage Coverage, and we would really like you to subscribe if you're not subscribed. And if you are subscribed already, thank you so much for the support. So, sponsors, as always, we have JetBrains with us who are willingly helping us throughout the journey of our meetup. And here we will be giving away some free licenses for a year subscription. So, if you are interested, please join our Telegram group and our meetup group, and we'll randomly select some of our subscribers to give away this subscription. So today's meetup is all about getting started with PHP 8. So why so? Because as you most of you might already know that PHP 7.4, which is like the latest version of PHP 7, is already out of active support from 28th of November 2021, and the security support will be till the next year of November, like this year of November, which is 28 November 2022. That is in 9 months. There would be a sunset on the PHP 7.x versions. So it's a great time to learn the latest version of PHP, which is PHP 8, and now the latest one is actually PHP 8.1. And we will actually be looking into some of the new features that PHP 8 has to offer, as well as 8.1. So let's get started. So let's start with the new features that are available on PHP 8. Okay. So the first one that you might have heard of is called match expression. So unfortunately, I didn't have much time to create like detailed slides, but I created a detailed demos. So let's go over them and try new things one by one. So let me change my screen to my editor and let's get started. So now, what we will do is try one of these features one at a time and try to implement these. Okay, so here we go. So we have our first PHP example page here. Can everybody see my code editor, or is it not visible? Okay, I think it is visible. That's great. So let's get started with the demo. So the first part, what we are going to try to do is something called match expression. So what is that? So before we do that, let me copy paste some sample code and try to show you something that you are already aware of. So here in my page, you will see that we have a sample PHP script in which we have response code of 200, which is a variable that we have put in, and we have a simple switch case in which we are having different cases. So we have for case 200, 300 will show that this variable will have okay. For case 400, it will be not found. 500, it would be a server error. And we also have a default switch case which puts in like an unknown status code. Okay, so now if I do an echo for this particular statement and save, and then move on to our terminal and try to run the code, you will see that we have a switch case of okay, because we had the response code variable as 200. And this is how a normal switch case works, which is great, right? So now how is it different in PHP 8? So this is how it looks in PHP 8. So the entire switch case which is written here is again written in a match expression, and this is how it looks. So we have a function called match, and we are passing in the response code variable, which is declared on top as a parameter. And then inside that, we have the different cases mentioned here. So we have 200 comma 300, which represents this one right here. 200 and 300 match to this part, which is okay. And then we have response code 400 for not found, 500 for server error, and then we have a default one, which is the unknown status code. And we can also print this out alongside the normal switch case and try to see what are the differences that they have as well. So if I run my code once again, press enter, we have a switch which is sending okay, and match is also sending okay. So let's try different iterations and try to see how they respond differently. So the first one is, let's say that I pass 200 as a string instead of an integer. Let's say what happens there. So if I do this, now you will see that the switch case still considers 200 as an converted as an integer, and then passed around in the cases. But for match, you will see that it matches to unknown state code, which means that here if it is strict check and here it is a loose check. So this is one of the various differences. The second one, let's say that we put in something like unknown. So let's say 999, save that, and then again go up, run the code, and you will see both of them are giving us the same response, which is unknown status code. Why? Because we don't have cases to handle 999, and which defaults to this default for the switch case and this line statement for the match case. Okay. So now let's see how the errors are handled. So let's say that I remove this default statement from our switch case, save it, and try to run it, see what happens. You'll see that you get an undefined variable from switch from this, and it doesn't really throw any kind of an error, right? But if I bring that back and remove this default statement from the match case and try to run it one more time, you will see that there is an uncaught, unhandled match exception that is thrown, which means that match case actually has better error handling. So this is what are the major differences between the switch case and the match case that we have. So this is how it looks. So hope you like the first example and the explanation that I provided. So let's move on to the next one, which is named argument. So let's try to understand what are named arguments. So again, let's move on to our code editor and try to see what a name argument really means. So the first one, we remove that. Of course, if you have any questions, just put it in the comments and I'll try to see if I can answer them during our presentation or the end of our presentation. Okay. So let's move on. So again, coming back, we are on the match statement. Sorry, not the match expression. Now we are on the named arguments. Okay, so what is a named argument? So let's take an example really quickly. So we do set cookie. This is the method, and as you can see, it has a lot of arguments. So we have the name, the value, expiration options, path, domain, secure, and HTTP only, right? So let's say that I would like to pass in secure as true, HTTP only as false, remains as is. How does it look in our current PHP version, which is PHP 7 or any version before PHP 8? So this is how it looks. So we have set cookie, then the cookie name, then we have to pass in a default argument, then another default argument to reach this point right here. But for us, using the named argument of PHP8, this is how it looks. So you can put in directly as a parameter, and then if you are looking to pass in a specific statement or a specific argument, you can just name the argument, put a colon in front of it, and then your value. So let's take an example of our own custom functions to make it more understandable. So let's declare a simple function right here. So here I have a sample function which takes in three arguments. We have argument A, argument B, and argument C. What it does, nothing really fancy. We just are passing, like returning these parameters as array values. Okay. So let's try to print out the response of our sample function and try to see how it works. So we have the sample function. We can pass in strings. So let's pass in, this is A. So this is our first parameter. So this is how we do it normally in our day-to-day implementation. Nothing really different here. So we have three different parameters that we have passed in. So this represents A, this represents B, and this represents C. And let's try to run that example one more time. And here you will see that we have an example wherein we have the three statements that are returning. Okay, great. So how do we change that? So let's try to implement the example that we got. So we can have it in a different way as well. So if we are using the named argument, we can just put in the name of the variable right in front of it. So I can put in C colon, and let's say I can put in A colon, and then I can put this as B colon. Okay. Now if I save, what is happening is that we, even though we have not changed the order in which we pass the arguments, we have mentioned the named argument in front of it. Let's see how the behavior changes here. So if I pass in now, here you will see that B is passed as the argument A. So how does that work? So if I check here, we have this is B, but we have named argument as A. So what happens is that even if we have passed in the second order, it will still be passed as the parameter A. And same happens for B and C as well. So C is represented by string A. So here you will see this is string A, which is the last one right here. And then again, we have a B, which is represented by string C. So we can just mention the name of the parameter right in front of it, put a colon and pass the argument. The order doesn't matter. So let's try to see a different example here. So this is the very simple example. You can also do an array spread if you want. So for example, I can just put in an argument saying that we have an array in which we have the different key value pairs. So the key represents the what you can say the argument name, and the value represents the value. And using an array spread, we can do something like this: save, and then if we pass in, it again becomes the same values that we passed in our first example. So here, as you can see that we can actually have an array in which we mention the variable name or the argument name as the key, and then the value is the array value, and it still works using an array spread. We can also move the order around, so I can move this up, this down, doesn't matter. Save it, and again pass in, press enter. The output doesn't change because the name argument remains the same for each of them. We can also have certain errors if they don't match the order. So for example, if I comment this out and I'm just passing B and C, it will actually throw an error saying that, oh, there is an uncaught argument counter error, and then we have argument A was not particularly passed. We can also get an error if we pass in a new argument which is not present in the function. So we might get an error for that as well. So if I pass in a new argument, let's say argument D, which is not really declared in this method, so we'll get an error as well. So if I go back to my terminal and do this, you'll see that there is an unknown parameter passed in D. So this is how it works. So hopefully you have a better understanding now about named arguments. Of course, and this is a new implementation in PHP8. There is a discussion if this is a pattern or an anti-pattern and so on and so forth, but it does have its own use cases. Okay, great. So I hope you were able to understand the named argument example that I gave, and hopefully you will be able to understand that as well. So if you have any doubts, please use the comment box to put in, and I'll try to answer it to best of my knowledge. Okay, great. So moving on, let's move on to a new example, which is union types. So let's talk about union types and what they are really. So what are union types exactly? So let's take a very basic example of what we have currently in PHP 7, and then we'll move on to what is the new functionality, which is union type, that is available in PHP 8. So if I pass in this, so let's save this method. So we have a sample method. Once again, we have a string, which is typecasting. Sorry, not typecasting, type hinting for our variable, which is input. And we are doing a printer of input. We are passing in hello as the parameter value. And then we are doing PHP end of line. So let's see what output we get. Of course, you might have already guessed what the output would be. It is a very simple example of hello. So now what happens here is that we can only pass in arguments or a string, which is available here. So if I try to pass in something like an integer, it will throw an error. So if I save this and enter, you will see that it gets passed in as a string. So why does that happen? Because we don't have a strict type allowed. So again, if I change this to, let's say, an array, then it will throw an error. So if I go here, press enter, you'll see that the argument must be a string and not an array. But if I pass in like a digit, which is integer 1, it actually gets typecasted into a string and then passed in. So how do we avoid that? We actually put declare strict. So if I put declare types, strict types equal to 1, and now if I go back and run the example, you will get an error that it must be a string. So here no typecasting happens once we have strict types equal to 1. Okay. So now how does the union help? So let's try that out. So let's say that if I want to go back to my example, uh, for certain scenarios, let's say that you have a case wherein the input would be either a string or an array. So what union types helps us is put in multiple allowed data types. So here I put in a pipe statement, pipe character, and then the second data type that I would like to allow. So now you can actually type hint multiple data types. So now if I save and run this again, you will see that we are getting hello, which is a string and which is allowed. And if I pass in it as an array, save that and try it one more time. Now it is also allowing arrays as well. So this is a very nice example in which we can understand how it works. So let's say that I want to allow integer as well. So I can put in int, and then I can put 1 here, save it, and try it one more time. And then you will see that we have 1 as an output. So right now our function parameter is actually accepting string, array, and int as well. So what about classes? Can we do that? Yes, we can. So let's declare a demo class right here. Save that. And we can actually put in another pipe and put in the class name to accept it, save it. And here at the very bottom, we will declare the class and pass it in. So we declared the class right here. We'll initialize the class here and save it. And hopefully it works. Yep. Here we get the object returned. Mm, 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 mm. Now, another thing to look into here is how do I make it accept null as well? So if I pass in null right now and save, it will actually throw me an error. So if I go here, it will say that must be some of this value and not a null. So if you are like aware of PHP 7's type hinting features, you might know that there is another thing which is called a question mark in front of it, wherein like it accepts either that data type or a null. But when you are using union type, that doesn't work together. So you have to pass in null as a data type and then save it, and now it'll work. So here you are getting nothing as an output because it's null, but it's not throwing an error, which means that it is accepting the input. So very important thing to note here is that you can't use question mark here if you are using a union type. Of course, if you are using a single data type and you just want an option between that data type or null, then you can use the question mark in front of it. So now this works for the parameters as well as the return types as well. So I can put in saying that, oh, nah, this parameter, this function will either return a string or a boolean, right? So I can do that and then change the function a little bit to make the error go away. So if I save this, da, 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 and this right here, now it works. So here also we are putting in the return type as string or boolean. So either it returns a string, it is also acceptable, or if it returns a boolean, it is also acceptable. So now if I run this again, null is returned, which again is not exactly what it is returning. It is actually doing a printer, but it is returning a boolean, so it is acceptable. So this is how the union type works, and hope you like this new functionality, and hope I see a lot of people using this use case if needed. Of course, again, there is a discussion between how flexible you want your functions to be and how many data types are you going to accept. So sometimes it becomes necessary if you have a very dynamic operation and a function that deals with a lot of data type. That's actually helps accepting those data types, but also restricting the amount of, or like the different types of data types you are accepting. So for example, before PHP 7 you actually had to do an internal check. So if I remove all of this and then I accept whatever is coming in, and then I do the check on my own. But here PHP is actually helping you out by doing it before it even reaches your code. So this is union type. So next up, we have union type we discussed. Now let's talk about promoted properties. Okay, I have a question. It seems that I am watching 10-minute delays anyway. Is this presentation explain my any relation PHP8 with Magento? We actually are looking into exclusively in PHP8 right now, trying to get everybody on the same page with PHP8, and then we'll have a follow-up presentation, I think, in Magento Meetup Lucknow, where we will talk about Magento's PHP8 migration, how you can maintain your extensions across like different languages, like different language versions of PHP 7 as well as PHP 8, and then automated tools which helps with the PHP 8 migration like Rector. So it would be like the next iteration of this presentation. Okay, great. So I think I hope you got the answer, and let's move on to our next one, which is promoted properties. So what are promoted properties? I'm sure you might have seen a promoted property example floating around on Twitter or LinkedIn. So I'll again try to show you how they work. So what are promoted properties? So before I explain that, let's take a look at a simple example class and how it looks currently in PHP 7. So here we have a demo class in which we have two properties named as first and second. And here the first property is public, whereas the second property is private. We have a constructor in which we have two arguments that we are accepting strings. So we have argument A and argument B. Both are type hinted as string, and we have default values associated with it. And then we are passing in this value right here to first and second, and we point argument A to the first property and argument B to the second property. And here at the very bottom, we are initializing this class, and then we are just trying to print the property first and doing an PHP end of line. So we save this and let's see what happens. So if I do this, you will see that we have value 1 that is printed out. And this is because we did not pass any of our what you can say values as arguments, and it takes the default values and arguments. So the first is mapped to $A, and that's why value 1 is taken. So now how do we change this in PHP 8 using promoted properties? So this is how it looks in PHP 8. So I can remove this completely and paste a new. Let's put this below it so that we can see the differences side by side. So here we have another demo class which is same as here. And here the first difference that you will see that the properties don't have to be declared separately. In the constructor itself, you can actually declare the scope of the property, the data type of the property, and the name of the property, and if you have values assigned to it. And we don't have to declare them separately and then again assign values to them separately. Another thing you will note in that the values that are assigned here should be exactly equal to what you're calling for the property name. We can't have like different name arguments for the constructor and different ones right here. So that's a difference. So now let's remove this old class and try to use this new class and see what the difference in output is. So if I do this, save and pass in, you again get the same value 1 returned. Why? Because the first property name first is taking the value as value 1, and we are trying to print that as is. And here in our demo class, we have not passed in our argument. We can do that as well. So if I want, I can pass in save and then print the value, and you will see that the value change has been passed because we are passing this as the first argument, which is mapping to this first property. And it changes the value, which is the default value, to whatever we have passed in here. We can also do some fancy things here. So we can also use named arguments here, save that, and again try to print it. You will see that it defaults back to value 1, because now using the name argument, we have not assigned it to the first parameter. We actually have assigned it to the second parameter. And now if I change this to second, save it, and oh sorry, it is a private property. But we can make it public just for the sake of our example, and try to print it. And here you will see that the value has changed. Okay, so this is how it all comes together. So we saw named variables, name parameters, and how it works with our promoted properties. So I hope you enjoyed this example and understood how different now the classes will look in PHP 8. So of course, the number of line of code will drastically decrease as we incorporate promoted properties into our classes. If you have any questions, please do put it in the chat and I'll try to answer them to the best of my knowledge. Okay, great. So moving on to the next one, which is the null safe operator. So what is a null safe operator? So let's again go back to our examples and try to figure that out. So save that. Now we have a blank slate. And now let's print something. So I took an example again from my clipboard, paste it here. So here we have a very simple JSON variable wherein we have a JSON string assigned to it. We do a JSON decode to convert it into an object. And now I try to print response, product, category names. So this is the response variable, which is converted into an object. We have the response object now, and then we point it to product, and then we point it to category names and try to print out the value. It should be clothing. So let's see what the output is. So here you will see the value as clothing. So this is a very basic example of trying to figure out how the properties and all works. Great. So how do I, let's say, try to figure out how this null safe operator works? So let's try to figure that out really quickly. So now we have, let's say, product, and then we, let's say, have this response associated with it. But sometimes there might be a case wherein the proper a product doesn't actually have anything. So let's say it has null, right? So now if I do this, I should get an error. So if I save this and do an enter, you will see that the attempt to read category names on null is not possible. So what can I do? So I can do something like this, which is the null safe operator. We put a question mark just in front of the dash and the arrow, and try it one more time, and now it doesn't throw an error. Of course you get a null, but it is not showing up because we are doing an echo. So here what happens is that if this property is null, it will not try to fetch this operation or this property name in front of it. So you don't have to use if statements. Normally what how we handle these types of situation is that we use an if statement and so on and so forth to understand, like, if we are getting the values for this property, and then again have an if check for anything going forward to that. We also have libraries right now which actually helps us try to get the value, doing several types of checks. But this in PHP 8 will actually help a lot, trying to reduce the amount of code that we normally write. So we can also have it in chaining process as well. So let's say I change it to category tags and then pointing to, let's say, en. Okay, save that and if I do this, I get clothing, jeans, and pants, which is there. So now let's say that the product doesn't actually have a category tag. So I can put this as null, and I can also have it chaining. So I can do something like this. So now if I save, it still gives me null, which is not an error. So you can handle that, but you don't get an error. So the null operator chaining is also possible. So you can have like question mark if you're not really sure every time you'll get a value or not. You can do this. Okay. So this is how it works. So hope you were able to understand how the null safe operator will help. Great. So let's move on to the next example that we have, which is improved exceptions. So there have been done some improvements that have been done on PHP8 to what you can say, make the exception handling a little bit more of a better experience. So how does it work? So let's try that out really quickly. So I changed the example to this. I think, yeah, we have PHP start tag. Great. So we have a very simple try catch block, wherein in the try block we are throwing an exception saying no, and then in the catch block we have an exception property in which we do a get message to get this no message. So let's see what happens. I save this, try to run it, and here you will see no, which is the exception message, which works. And this is normally how we do it. Okay. So now there can be scenarios wherein we are throwing the exception, but we are not really doing anything with the exception message. So there are scenarios wherein you throw this exception internally, but you are not really doing anything. So now for a second example, you'll see that we are just throwing an exception. We don't have a message that has been thrown, but we are handling something in the catch statement, which is like just hello. So if I run this, you will see that you have hello in front of it. So which is great. So now in PHP8, what you can do is that you, if you are not using the exception property, you can just remove it and save it, and it will still work. But in PHP 7 or below, it is not possible. So this is another thing that helps you mitigate a lot of what you can say, the code sniffer issues, wherein like if you have passed in a property and you're not using it, you'll get these errors. But now if you are not using the exception property for any of your like catch case handling, so you can just decide to not to pass it. You also have to only pass just the exception keyword. That's it. Great. So you can also do something like this as well. So here, if I do something like this, remove this part. So here I have an throw exception variable wherein like I'm passing a closure function which throws an exception. Okay. Now, if I save this, run the code, you will see nothing happens because the function or like the closure function has never been called. So we can actually pass the function or like call the function, and now you should see an output as hello, right? So this was also not possible prior to PHP8, and now it is possible wherein you can have a closure function wherein you have the exception logic and you can call that exception wherever you see fit. So this was also not possible in PHP 7, but now it is possible in PHP 8. So hope you were able to understand the improvements that were done for the exception. And let's move on to the next part, which is object class names. So what are object class names? So let's take an example one more time. So let's take this example. So we have a PHP class with the namespace Acme, and we have the class name as demo, right? So now you have like various different examples that you can try out. So for example, let's say if I do an echo and do, let's say, Acme slash demo class, okay, and save that, go here, and now you actually get the namespace, right? So if I remove this should again work because we don't have any other namespaces. It works. So we have the Acme demo class, which is printed out using the colon colon class keyword. Okay. But let's say that we assign it to, let's say, a variable while initializing it, something like this. So in PHP 7, all you have to do to get the class name is something like this, wherein you put in get class function, you put in the property, and then do an end of line. And here you will see that the Acme demo class is available, or the demo class is printed out. But in PHP8, you can do it in a different way, wherein you can just use the property name and sorry, the variable name, and then a colon colon class keyword, and it will still work. So this comes in really handy for troubleshooting, wherein like you have a property or a variable property or an argument, and you really quickly want to figure out which class this object is referring to. You can just do an echo the property name colon colon class, no get class method required now. So this is another thing that has happened in PHP 8. Again, small little thing, and you can actually make it work. We again have a question from Anand. Hi, can we catch fatal errors? Just curious. Yeah, we actually can catch fatal errors in PHP 7 itself. PHP 8, of course, does the same thing. So you can actually catch fatal errors now. Okay, great. So, hope you got an understanding of how this whole object name works, object class name works. Okay. Now, let's move on to our next example, which is the stringable interface. So, how does this stringable interface work? So, this is a new introduction or a new interface that has been introduced in PHP 8. And let's try to understand how it works. So, here I can do. Yes, so let's change this to a method. So we have a method named some method, and then we have a type hint of string for the argument input, and then we echo out with a typecasting of string for the input, and then we have PHP end of line. Here we call the some method name, and then we pass in the argument as hi, and let's see what the output is. Of course, everybody knows what the output is, but just for the example's sake, we are running this. So here we have hi in front of it, which is great. Now, let's try to introduce a class to it. So if I put in a class, da, da, da. So here we have a demo class. We just declare a class, right? And then we can declare the class right here and pass it in. So here you will see that it will throw an error, something like this, wherein it says that it can be type string only and not an object, which is great. We can make some changes to this class to make it more acceptable to the string type check. So what we can do is pass something like this, wherein we have a public method to a magic function called toString, and just save that, put it right here, run it, and now it gets typecasted into a string. So when that typecasting happens to a string, it is converted the toString function is called, and this is what it is returning, and this is what we are printing out here as well, right? So now if I put in, let's say, a strict type check in front of it, let's see what happens now. So if I do this, and now again the error starts to happen, wherein it will check if the passed in value is a proper string or not. It will not try to do a typecasting during the argument passing. So how do we handle this? So for example, we are accepting strings, but we will also be accepting objects that can be converted properly into a string. So for that, what we do is just pipe in and put in stringable as an argument check or like a data type check. And now if I pass this in, we get string from the demo class. So what is happening right now? So here we have two different types of checks. One is for string. So if normally somebody passes in a string, that is acceptable. And second check that we are doing is stringable. So normally it is a good practice to put in strict type checks. And if that is on, you cannot pass in a class which actually has a two string magic function declared in it, because it will throw an error saying that it's an object. We won't take it in. So for that, we actually have a new data type which is stringable, which represents that even if it is an object and you have a two string method declared in it which helps you typecast into a string, it is still acceptable. So this is the new change that has been introduced in PHP 8. I hope you were able to understand from the example how the stringable interface works. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. So next, we have three new string functions that has been introduced, and I think you are going to like this a lot. So let's remove this example and try to do something really, really fancy. Okay, great. So here is a very simple example. So what are we trying to do here? So what we are trying to do is trying to figure out if a string has a particular word in it. Okay, so this is a typical PHP 7 example, or like below 7 example as well, wherein we have a string and we like to figure out if there is a keyword inside that string that is present or not. So normally what we do, we use strpros. We pass in the arguments of the string as well as the needle, or like the search keyword that we are trying to find, and then check it against if it is false. If it is not equal to false, then we return it as true, or run our logic inside that statement, right? So it's kind of a hacky thing that we do in order to figure this out, right? So if I run this argument, sorry, this example, and you will see that it is returning true. But if I change it to something else wherein the word is not present in the string, you will see that it doesn't return anything because it doesn't satisfy the if statement. So what happens in PHP 8? So PHP 8 actually took our cries into their consideration. There has been a long time ask to introduce these type of string check functions, and now we have them. So the first function that I would like to introduce is str underscore contains, which from the name says that what it does. So it actually tries to figure out if there is a word inside the string. So here, this if statement gets converted into this. So here we have str underscore contains. We pass in the first argument, which is like the keyword, sorry, the string statement that we want to the search to happen inside, and then the second parameter is the keyword or the needle which we want the search to happen. So now if I do this, save, run, both of them are returning true. And if I change something to this, and here also I change it to this, it doesn't return anything. So for everybody using PHP 8, you can move on to using str underscore contain for any of your search related logics. But if you have to give a backward compatibility to PHP 7 and so on, you can actually use this. Okay, great. So this is the first of the three methods that have been introduced. The second one. So let's try to figure out the second method that has been introduced. So the previous example was to figure out if the string contains a particular word. Now we are trying to figure out if the strings actually starts with this particular word or not. So here we have an example. Here what we are trying to do is, this is a string which is how are you, and we are trying to find out if how is the word it starts with in the string, so which is true, so it should return true. So now if I save this and try to run the function, it will return true, right? So what are we trying to do here? So what we are trying to do is basically map through the entire string from the 0th pointer, which is from the beginning, and try to figure out if from the length of the word. So basically we do an str length of how. right? And try to figure out the length of the word, and from 0 till the length of the word we try to figure out if that word matches what we are trying to find here, and we get an echo statement of true if it matches, right? So again, there is no internal functions that you can use in PHP 7 for this, so that's why you have to repeat this logic many times if there is a need for this, right? So now in PHP 8 we have str starts with. Again, the name gives out what it does. It tries to figure out if the string that has been passed as the first argument starts with the needle or the second argument that has been passed into. So if I save this and try to run it, it will return true here as well, right? So now if I change it to like something else, like Hawi or something, it should not match, and we should not get any outputs. So it is exactly replicating this logic into an internal function, which is str starts with. And finally, the third one, you might have guessed it, it's str ends with. So there has been again a lot of cases where people use this logic as well, wherein first we try to figure out if the statement or the string actually contains the word, if starts with the word, and now the third one is if it ends with the word. So here again we are trying to do pretty much the same thing, wherein the minus means like we go back from the behind and try to figure out if it ends with a certain keyword that we have passed in. So if I save this and try to run it, you will see that it gives an output as true. If we change it to something else, wherein like we remove the question mark or something like that, it will not return any output, which means that it is not going into the if statement. Here also, PHP8 actually has given us an internal function that we can use instead of it, which is str ends with. Again, the name suggests what it does. So we have the first parameter as the string, and the second parameter as the keyword that we are trying to find if it is ending with that particular keyword or not. I can save that and then run it and save it, and now it doesn't give me any output because our search is wrong. So if I change it to you and then a question mark, you should get an true for both of these methods. So here, if you are, let's say, an extension developer who actually has to give like backwards compatibility, you actually have to use this method. But if you are, let's say, an active service developer who are just developing it for a specific project, and you know for sure that it is only going to run on PHP8, you can start using this method as well. So I hope you enjoyed the three new methods that have been introduced. That has been introduced by PHP8. Normally, a lot of people actually have asked for this functionality a lot, and thus in PHP8, these three methods have been introduced. So we have another question again from Anand. Does it also support regular expression or just handle simple string search? I think just simple string search. Yeah, it does only support only string search. As far as I know, I might have to double check on the documentation, but so far I know it does only check for simple string, no regular expression support. Okay, great. Moving on to the next, exploring weak maps. So this example is going to be a little bit longer because a lot of you might never use weak maps, but let's try to understand what is the need of a weak map and how it works. Okay. So let's remove this and save, and let's declare a small class right here. So weak map is all about handling your memory very efficiently. So how does that work? Let's try to understand. So here we have a class, we have a constructor defined and a destructor defined as well. So we have a construct operation which gives us an output, and then a destructor operation which gives an output as well. Okay, great. So now let's say we initialize this class. We put in something like this. We have a variable called object1, and we initialize this class demo into object1. Okay, and then save, do nothing, and let's see what happens. So if I run it, so it will give you the first key or the string that is written is this, and this is the class init, which means that whenever you are initializing this class, the constructor is fired, and you actually get this statement returned. And then once the script actually has done executing, the garbage collector comes into play and it wipes out the object from the memory, and then you actually get this destruct operation executed as well. So this is how a normal execution of PHP works. Okay. So now let's do something a little bit more fancy. So here let's put in an echo statement of creating an object. We have the first object, which is obj1, and then let's create another variable which is obj2 or object2, and then assign object1 into it, right? So now let's try to unset our object one, which is this one right here. So what we are trying to do right now is that we have declared, we have initialized our demo class into this variable as object one. Then we put this object one inside the value of object two. And then now we are trying to unset this, right? And then finally, we do a get class right here and then save, right? So let's try to run this. So we have the first statement, which is creating the demo object. So this is the line that is getting executed. Now we have this class is init. So which means that this line is executed wherein we are initializing the demo class, and we have this statement executing, right? Now we are saying removing the demo object, which is this one we executed unset just below it. Now you will see that even if we did an unset, the destructor was never called, or the destruct magic function was never called. Then we did an echo on the class of object 2, which is the second one right here, and still we got the object, and then finally everything else got executed and it reached the end of the script, and now you see that the class is getting destroyed. So why does this happen? So normally what happens is that whenever you initialize an object, this is put into a memory space or a memory ID and then assigned to object one. And when you use the object one to point to object two, this also get pointed to this particular object, right? So if you delete or unset the object one, it still has a pointer to object two, and thus garbage collector never picks it up because it thinks that object 2 is still going to use it, and thus the object is never deleted. So how does weak map help us here? So if I again remove this example, so of course the first example was just to explain you how the PHP garbage collector works and how the memory is freed out. So let's try to use weak map and how it works. So I will remove this part right here, pass in here a weak map, which is our variable name, and we initialize a new class of weak map. Okay. Now, here again, we start by creating an object right here, save it, and we assign it to the weak map. So this is how the weak map works. We have a weak map variable in which the key is the object initialized, and then the value can be anything that you would like to save against it, right? So now, if I do a count right here, it will give us a count which should return one object because we have one inside it. And then we can actually do something like this, which means that after assigning it to weak map, we are then about to remove it or unset the object, right? And then finally, we do a var dump on the weak map. So let's comment this out for now and try to see how it behaves before we try to unset it. So here again, let's revisit what we have done so far. We declared a weak map class, and we have initialized a weak map class and then assigned it to a variable called weak map. And then we are creating a demo object. This is a string that will be echoed out. Then we are initializing our demo class into a variable called obj1, Then we are using the weak map variable, creating an array key and assigning the object here, and then whatever value we want to. And then we are trying to figure out the count, like how many classes have been assigned or how many array keys does it have. And then we finally do a var. So let's see what output we get here. So here you will see that we are creating an demo object, then the init statement executes or the initialization works. Then we have one count, which is basically the counter here, which is echoed out. So we have one single object assigned to weak map. And this is how it looks. So we have the key, in which we have the key, which is the object, and then we have the value, which is assigned against the object, right? And now let's say that we unset it, right? And how does this work? So here, as soon as we did an unset, the class is also getting destroyed. So weak map actually helps you avoid those what you can say, garbage collector issues that we just saw in our previous example. So now the pointer comes is that when do we use a weak map? So normally, like 99% of your use cases will not use weak maps. It would be only used by what you can say, frameworks or libraries which actually are defining this. Let me just stop my telegram. There we go. Okay, so this would be the libraries that have been defined, or like libraries that are trying to utilize object caching, wherein like once the object has been initialized, it is actually assigned to the weak map, and using the weak map, the already initialized object is supplied around. And this will actually help reduce, let's say, the memory usage whenever the object is no longer in use or unset. The weak map also gets rid of it automatically. So this is like much better garbage collection. So I hope you were able to understand. I know like weak maps are a little bit complicated to understand because we don't use them daily in our day-to-day example. So it might be a little bit difficult to understand, but I would highly recommend you check out their documentation and try to see the different use cases they have to offer. Normally, you won't use it in your day-to-day development, like projects and all, but it mostly gets used by libraries or frameworks wherein like object caching is used. Great. Let's move on to the next part, which is trailing commas in function definitions. Okay, great. So what are these? So trailing commas and how they work. So here, let's say I have a function, very simple function. My function, we have the first argument, the second argument, the third argument. So normally, if there is, let's say, another argument that needs to be added, what normally in PHP 7 you have to do is put in a comma and then put in like fourth argument or the fourth one, right? So now the thing happens is that whenever you try to committing, you see a change in line number 6, and then a line number 7 is added, right? So, and sometimes what happens are developers also forget to remove the trailing commas in front of the object, sorry, in front of the methods and arguments, and then also you get an error. So there was a request to make it compatible like we have for arrays. So in an array, for example, let's say if I declare an array something like this, I can actually do a comma 3 and then save, and there is no error. But if I do this in PHP 7, it will throw an error. Like if you have a trailing comma in front of your argument, you will get an error. But in PHP 8, this has been taken into consideration, and now you don't have to worry about a trailing comma after your arguments. So this is a new feature. Before PHP 8 actually has the what a lot of people used to do is try to write it a little bit differently. Something like this used to happen, wherein like if you have to introduce a new argument, you just do something like this. Dollar something like this. So I have seen people using this type of style of writing the code as well, wherein like you are responsible for adding your own commas, right? So this is also was introduced by some people in PHP 7 or like previous versions, just to make sure that they don't forget comma behind the like arguments. They just put it in front of the argument. So I hope you were able to understand how trailing commas in function definitions also work. Okay, we again have another questions from Anand. The weak map object is a global object. How is it work? No, it is not a global object. It is a class using which you get that functionality of pushing in your what you can say uh, your objects onto the array key. Yeah. Another thing that reminds me of this is that there are certain things different in weak maps as well. So if I go back again to my previous example here, so here you can only have objects as your key. You cannot have like a key as your like any some kind of string as your key. It will throw an error. It is not allowed. You cannot have it something like this, wherein like you put in square brackets, which is normally used in arrays, wherein you get an incremental key added as many times as you want. If you are using something like this, right, it is not allowed. So you have to use if you are creating a key inside a weak map, you have to use an object. Great. So let's move on to our next examples. So now we have completed all the features, not all the features, good features that have been introduced in PHP 8, or like the uh, features that you might want to use day to day. There are a lot of other features that have been introduced in PHP 8. You can read up on the documentations. Now we are moving into the PHP 8.1 territory, which is like the newest of the new that PHP 8 has to offer. So let's take a look what are there as well. So read only properties. So how and does this work? So let's try to have a look in the examples. So save that. Okay. So now let's put in our demo class, and let's also put in our objects as well. So if I pass in something like this, so here we have a demo class wherein we have a constructor. We are using the promoted property feature of PHP 8 as well, wherein we are not declaring the properties or the global properties separately in the class. We are using the constructor argument to define that both of these are public properties, and they will accept only string, and that's it. So now what we can do is assign something like this, save it. So now we have an property, not a property, variable, and in that we are initializing the class demo class, and we are passing in two values, data1 and data2, right? And now, as both of these properties are public, we can actually echo out object first and then and PHP end of line and save it. And if I run this, you will see data1 has been echoed out. But now, as it is a public property, it is also mutable, which means that I can actually assign something new, or like change the data of the property first. And then if I try to do save, which is echo object first and then print an end of line, now you will see that initially when we initialize the object, it was data1, but now it has changed to data new. So this is the problem with having public properties, right? So normally what we do is that if we would like to avoid this situation, what we would do is make this private and then declare a function which is public, and a getter function using which you can just fetch the the property value. But there is a new way of doing it in PHP 8.1 as well, which is called read only. So let's say that I want both of these properties to be read only. Don't mind the errors that are coming. My VS Code is not really compatible with PHP 8.1, so that's why you will see certain errors. But don't worry, the code is still executable. So here, what I'm trying to do now is, let's say that if I comment this out and save, right now what I'm trying to tell is that even though these are public properties, they are read only, which means that they can be only assigned values during initialization, which is right here. We have data 1 and data 2 assigned. And if I run this code, you will see data 1 and data 1, right? Because we just commented out the part where we assign a new value to it. Now if I try to assign a new value to the first property, which is this one, which has been assigned a read only keyword to it, let's see what happens. Now you will see an error saying that cannot modify read only property in demo class first in this particular line number. So this is a really nice addition to PHP 8, wherein you can have read only properties which are public, and you don't have to add additional checks or like getters to get those values. So initially in PHP, like below PHP 8.1, what you had to do if this is a situation that comes in, we actually had to make it private, then get a function or a getter function, which actually gives us an output of that particular value, right? But now you don't need to do that. You can just refine it as a read only, and anybody tries to mutate that particular property, it is not going to happen. So this is a nice new addition in PHP 8.1, which is read only properties. Great. So what next? We also have enums. So what are enums? So if you are doing database work, you might have come across the particular what you can say situation of enums, wherein like you have particular things that you would like to take in, or like particular pieces of code, strings, like a drop down wherein you have very selected or selective values that you are accepting, right? So this is the same thing that PHP 8.1 also offers. So let's try a very simple example. So let's say, oopsie, we don't have PHP started. So PHP started. So we now have a class. Let's change this to this called order. So what we are doing with order is something like this. Put in something like completed or something, right? Okay. So now we have a class called order, in which we have two public properties. We can make it private as well, doesn't matter. I'm just trying to assign values to them. Or maybe not, let's keep them public. We need it for an example, or else I'll have to write getters and setters, which I don't want to do. Okay, so here we have a class called order. We have a constructor wherein we are declaring properties using the promoted properties feature of PHP 8. We have one called increment ID, the other called status. Both of them are string acceptable, and both of them are public. I have a variable called order, in which we are initializing this class and passing in our, let's say, the increment ID of the order, which is demo 001, and then also the status of the order, which is completed, right? And it is pretty much good, right? But now let's say that I am going to only accept certain statuses only, which would be like let's say pending, processing, and complete, right? So in PHP 8, or like below PHP 8.1, what we had to do is actually check what kind of statuses are coming. Then let's say we can have an in array check, wherein we have all the values in an array, right? And we try to check if it is an acceptable status or not, and then we start with our processing part, right? But in PHP 8.1, we have a new class type called enum class, and this is how we can make it work. So now let's say that I declare this class called enum. So here, this is a different keyword which is called enum. Again, please try to avoid the errors that are coming in. This is because PHP 8.1 is not supported in my VS Code right now. So enum, and then the class name, which we are putting in as status, right? So now here I will put in certain cases. So we have case 1 as pending, then we have case 2 as processing, and we have case 3, which is complete, right? So now we take this and pass it instead of string, we will be accepting this. And here, instead of using this, we will actually use something like complete. Right. So now if I save this and try to run the code, nothing happens. Let's try to print it out a little bit. So let's try to print out the example. So what we are doing is taking the object, getting the status, and from there trying to print out the name. So here, if I run this, you will see complete as the name coming in right here, which is this one. So let's try to pass in something else which doesn't match this. So let's say I pass in done or something instead of complete. And now it'll actually throw an error saying that it must be a type of status. And from there, you can only pass in these three type of cases only, right? So here we have something called case name. We also have something called case value as well, but we have not defined the value. So you can actually do it something like this, wherein we define the value as well. So you can say pending, the value is also pending. We can just repeat the value name as the case name as well, but you can have a different value as well. So for example, let's say for done, for complete, it would be marked as done instead of complete, but for our internal usage, we use it as complete. But for, let's say, the front end, or like wherever you show the result, you want to show it as done, so it can be done this way as well, wherein you have a case name which would be different and the value which would be different as well. So as soon as you declare a name, a value in front of it, you actually have to declare a return type which is string, because we are returning a string right here. So now if I print the name, it will work. uh, Duplicate value enum status pending and processing in line 6. Oh, sorry. So like you saw, we cannot have duplicate names as well. So sorry, duplicate values as well. So this is also very important. Now you see an argument saying that it would be it must be a type of status. So let's fix that as well. So let's take in status colon colon, and then let's say complete. Okay, save that and print it. You will see it is coming as complete. But if I want, I can also get the value associated with the case as well. And now if I print it out, you will see it is marked as done. Okay, so you can also assign what you can say integers to it as well. So you have either string or integers. It doesn't support arrays till now, so you can change it to int and then again print it out. It will still work and you'll get an output as 3. So as soon as you change this, you also have to change the return type as well, which can be changed from string to integer as well. And now you can do a little bit more as well. So inside the status, what you can say, enum class, you can also have some fancy functions that also does something different as well. So for example, I can have this function which is a color function, wherein depending on the different statuses of the order, I will return a particular color. So this can be useful when you are trying to render a order grid, wherein depending on the status of the order, you would like to change the line of the table into a different color so that it is more visible for the admin. So it can be done using this as well. So we looked into match expression on our first example. So we are using that. We are using this, which means the status, right? And you don't have to use any pointing to let's say pending or something like that. It directly takes that. And here I am checking if it is pending, then it should be red. If it is processing, it should be yellow, and if it is complete, it should be green, right? So now here at the very bottom, I can also do something like this, wherein I change it to something like color. And now if I print it out, I'll see that the value is 3, which is complete, and you will get green. But if I change it to, let's say, pending for some reason, and then save it, and now you will see that the value returned is 1. I can change that to name as well, if that is more readable for you. And you see pending, and then the color returned to it, matching to it, is red, right? So you can do that as well. You can also do direct comparison as well, which is something like this, wherein we can do a bardom just to get a true or false out of it. Save that and run it. You will see that it is returning as false because the status right now is mapped to pending, and we are trying to compare it with complete. But if I change it to this, save it, and you get a boolean as true. So this is how it works. So hopefully you understood how the enum class actually works, how the cases can be used to do a strict check on the arguments that are passed in, and what are the various things like the case name and the values can be utilized for, and also the functions that can be declared inside of your ename class to do much more outputs, or like much more operations than you want. So I hope you were able to understand enums as well. Okay, we got another questions from Vishal. Does public and read only need to be in the same order? Yeah. So basically, you have to first define the scope of your property. Then, if it is a read only, then you put that keyword, and then you put in the data type, and then finally your property name. So it has to be in an order. I tried; it doesn't work out of order. You can also make it like private as well, not a problem. But again, like it doesn't really make sense to make a private property read only, right? So you can actually do it. So let's say somebody using a setter function and tries to change the property name, it will also not work. So you can do that as well. But most of the time, what I've seen the examples being used for is using public properties with read only. Okay, great. So now we also understood enums. If you have any questions, please again use the comments to understand, ask your question. I'll try my best to answer them. So I hope you enjoyed understanding enums. We being Magento developers, I think there would be a lot of cases wherein we will be using enums in our future projects as well. Okay, next up we have improvements to array spreading. So let's see how it works. Mm, Back array spreading. Yeah. So how does that work? So again, let's remove this example, and let's take a look at how array spreading works. So let's declare PHP, right? Yep, there we go. Okay. So let's take an example of two arrays. We have array A, which is having two values, array B again having two values, right? And then we used to do in like PHP 7 or like previous to PHP 8. This is how it works. So let's try to paste this code here. Okay, now let's try to understand what we have written so far. So we have array A with two values associated with it. We have array B again having two values associated with it. We are using a third variable called merged. Again, this can be anything. It's just written merged. It doesn't really have to be merged variable name, right? And then we are using array spreading, wherein we are using three dots and then our $A and then three dots $B and then merged. Okay, so now if I run this code, you will see that they have been merged together. So we have A, B, C, and D. So we have A first and then B getting merged into A. So if you want it in a different order, you can pass in a different order, save it, and you will see that CD is merged first, and then A and B are merged together. So it depends on like the order in which you pass it, right? So this was possible in PHP 7 if you had numeric keys, which means that you don't have an associative array. Now, in PHP 8.1, you actually have this improvement wherein you can have a key which is a non-numeric key and then value associated with it, and you can do the same array spread as well. Here you will see that the array key A and B, C and D are arranged in order, and the values are there. Again, it works similarly to array merge. So let's say that if you have a array key which is same as that of your previous array in the order in which they get merged, so first these two arrays will be put into the stack, and then this will be put into the stack, and as A matches the key that is already present, it will be overridden with DD. So it normally works how array merge works, and here you will see that A actually has the value DD associated with it instead of AA. Okay, so this is how it works, and of course you can have it like differently, and you'll see all the four keys as well. So this is a nice little improvement that has been added in PHP 8.1. Point 1 is very important, so you have to understand what's available in 8 and 8.1. So this is a new feature in 8.1. So improvements to array spreading. Next, we have first class callables. Again, this is a slight new improvement that has been introduced here as well. So for example, let's remove this and add our new example. So what is our example? We have a demo function. So here we have our demo function. Let's remove this public thingy. Don't need that. Okay, so we have a function called demo. We take an input. We are not doing any kind of type check or type hinting right now, and we are taking this into and returning whatever keys are available, right? Now, we take in an array of inputs. So we have an array of inputs, input 1, input 2, input 3. And now, if I want to pass them one by one, this is how it looks. So we'll do an array map, call in demo, which is the function name, and then the uh, inputs that are passed in, right? And now, if I do a printer of outputs, let's see what we get. Da-da-da. Sorry. There we go. So now you have each of them returned as the return statement from the function. So what is happening is that using array map, we are calling this method one by one and passing different arguments to it, one iteration at a time, right? So now in PHP 8, what you can do is do something like this, in which we are passing the function name instead of like a key or an array. You can actually call the function directly and then put in three dots and then your inputs after that, and save that. Again, ignore the errors that are coming in, and if I run it again, you will get the same input. Sorry, the same output. So this is again a small little addition that has been added into PHP 8, and this is what is called first class callables. Next up, we have intersection types. So what is this intersection type? So this is a new little fancy thing that has been introduced in PHP 8.1 as well. So let's try to understand what this feature is using an example. Okay, so let's say that I have a class. Let's say it's called product class. Okay, so we have a product class, and let's say that we have two simple properties that we are accepting public properties. One is called a key, ID, and a key, right? Now, let's say that we have an interface that we declared. So we have an interface with unique ID, which has a public function called unique ID. Mm, 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 mm. Okay. Uh, Save that. Let's have a function, and let's implement that right here. Error. Oh, okay. That's it. Uh, Makes sense. Okay, so we have one interface called with unique ID, and then let's introduce another interface called with URL key, right? And then again, we have the same thing here, wherein we have declared a get unique ID and then get unique key. And we implement these two, let's say, interfaces right here. And now it will throw me an error saying that you need to declare two functions. So let's try to do that and press enter. Uh, okay, so let's do string and two here as string as well. So now we have declared both of these methods, and now the errors are gone. So basically, we implemented this interface which is with unique ID and URL with URL key. So these two interface has been implemented, and then we have declared the functions that needs to be implemented here as well, right? And then finally, we have a function called get product info. Okay, so let's declare a function called get product info, and here we pass in, let's say, the property, right? Pass in enter, and now let's say that I'm trying to get the unique ID of the product, something like this, right? So now I can do something like, let's say I am trying to get this function which is get unique ID, right? And what I can do is I can pass in as this, which means that the property should implement with unique ID, right? And that's how it goes in here, right? And now let's initialize this class really quickly. So let's take a property equal to our new product class, right? Pass in this, and it takes in two arguments. One is ID, so let's pass in an ID of 115 and URL key of URL key, something like this, right? And now let's call this function. So it already has an echo, so we don't need to do that. We do product info, and we pass in our object, which is this one. This time also have added this, save that, and we have an end of line added here just in to get a good output. So now if I run this code, hopefully everything runs according to plan, and we have 115, right? So now if I add something new to this code and I introduce something like URL key as well and save it. Hmm. Yeah, so now it is throwing an error saying that, oh, okay, so URL key is an undefined for this particular interface. So what I do is I copy this interface and then pass in as pipe, right? Save it and run it, it will still run, right? Now the problem that arises here is that it is an or check, which means that either it has to implement this or implement this. So at any point, if any of these interfaces are removed, as long as one of them are satisfied, it works, not a problem. But what if we want both these interfaces to be implemented and then only it should be acceptable in this particular function. So how do we do that? So prior to PHP 8.1, what we had to do is actually create a third interface. Okay. And then both, something like both interface or something like that, right? And then we extend it with, no, sorry, not extend, implement it. This one, comma, and this one as well, right? And of course we do nothing inside it because we're just, oopsie. Okay. So something like this. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong here. Accepted, expected, implement. Uh, Anyways, so basically we used to implement it something like this, and we pass it in here. But let's say for some other reason another new interface has been added, then problem used to occur. So now in PHP 8.1 you have a new operator called AND, which is used instead of the pipe, which represent an OR operator. We actually have an AND operator as well. So in again, ignore the errors. So if I run this, it still work, right? But at any point, if some one of this is removed and ran, it will actually throw an error saying that it should have both these interfaces implemented. So the first one, which is pipe, is either or, and kind of represents the same and logic that we implement. Both of these should be implemented. I think I have to add extends, right? Thanks, Anand, for that. So next up, the final feature that we have is called a never type. So what is this never type? So let's try to understand using another example. This is the final example. So just another 5 minutes, I should be over with all the examples that I have. So how does this work? So let's say that you have a function, let's say called redirect. Okay. And a redirect, what it does is just takes in, let's say, a header for, let's say, the location or something, right? And then we pass in, let's say, the URL, right? It accepts the URL from the top. So let's put it there. Let's make it a little fancy, and then we have like a string, right? So all of you who have been worked with core PHP might have seen this function one too many times, right? So now what we normally do after this is add an exit in after it. So what this means is that the redirect will happen and nothing else will execute after that, right? So normally till PHP 8, like PHP before PHP 8 or 8.1, we used to use something called void, which means that it will not return anything. But now we have something which is a new statement called never, which means that in this function, once this function is called, it will actually halt the execution of the code, which can be either using an exit or a die, or you throw an exception. So if you throw an exception, again, the execution will stop then and there. So this is the new never keyword that has been introduced in PHP 8 as well. And I think that's about it. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in and listening to the presentation that I had. And I hope you enjoyed, got a little bit of value out of it. And I am open for any questions that you might have. Does anybody have any questions or doubts? Please put it in the chat and I will try to answer them. Okay, it seems that either I did a very good job explaining all the features or everybody here fell asleep. So either ways, thank you so much everybody for joining in into this meetup. We tried to do it in a different format this time using live streaming. Tell us in the comments or chat, how do you like the live streaming experience? Did you enjoy it, or would you like to have it in a different format? And thank you again for joining, and have a great rest of your weekend.